So welcome to AAM's workshop on cubes and squares, footage as street activism. So playing actual slaughterhouse and animal cruelty footage on a monitor is an impactful method of public outreach. The purpose of cubes and squares is to engage onlookers about the footage they're looking at. By shedding light from the victim's point of view, outreachers encourage the public to open their minds about what they're responsible for. This workshop offers the best tips for maximizing this powerful form of activism. This workshop features AAM mentors Amanda Murphy and Michael Davis, and guest speakers Paulo Smith and Louise Coryell. My name is Michelle Granberg. I'm your moderator tonight. I'm a mentor and a team member with Animal Activism Mentorship. I'm located in New Jersey, and I've been vegan and active for 5 years. A little bit about AAM. AAM's mission is to build a global community of powerful and effective activists in order to meet our ultimate goal of animal liberation. We offer a free online program dedicated to pairing experienced mentors with those who want to gain knowledge, build experience, and develop confidence in their activism. Additionally, we offer free workshops that train and educate our mentors, mentees, and the public on various aspects of animal rights activism. We're also proud to announce our strategic alliance with one of the oldest animal rights organizations in the world, Farmed Animal Rights Movement, or FARM. If you're interested in becoming a mentor or mentee or want to get involved, please visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com, and follow both AAM and FARM on social media. So I'm very excited to introduce our presenters. And first up, we're actually going to play you a short video from our first presenter, Michael Davis. Michael is an AAM mentor and activist from New Zealand. And because he's from New Zealand, he wasn't able to be here quite for the timing with us tonight, but he was awesome enough to create a video just for this workshop with us to play right now as we get started.
Hi guys, thank you so much for tuning into the workshop. I'm so glad that you're passionate enough in the animal liberation movement to learn and improve on skills that will help us achieve that goal we have. I'm Michael Davis, I'm an animal rights activist from New Zealand, and I've been doing outreach for about 1.5 years now. I want to share with you a brief history on these outreach events, highlighting notable organizations that host them, and lastly, how and why they work, regardless of the respective branding from each of those organizations. The first organization bringing light and expansion to this kind of activism was the Earthling Experience, followed closely by Anonymous for the Voiceless, founding themselves in 2016, being inspired by that event. Other organizations soon followed suit, adding adjustments to the core structure of the event, such as the Save movement, and most recently, We the Free. Regardless of the branding, the event is based on the key principle of showing slaughterhouse footage while activists bear face coverings and stand in an outward cube formation to draw attention solely to the video. Unlike standard pamphlet outreach, this adds much needed context, showing the truths and evidence of the inherently cruel animal agricultural industries. The odd nature of the demonstration in a very high traffic public space draws attention to the demonstration and develops intrigue for members of the public to stop and see what's going on. The target audience of these events are those who stop and watch and connect with the animals that they are seeing through the footage. The outreachers who are there to have conversations with these people are there to educate them on animal rights and, most importantly, hold them accountable once they understand what they're paying for. These events produce extremely rare situations where an animal rights activist can talk to someone who has just witnessed what exactly these animals go through. Outside of these events, this interaction can only happen with family or friends after a considerable effort to get them to watch the documentary in the first place. Generally, when people look up veganism, they are shown many recipes and claims of the benefits to health and the environment. Unfortunately, animal rights frequently comes last, if at all, in this discussion. This makes the public perception of veganism a virtue instead of an ethics-based obligation. This is why outreach is so vital to producing ethical vegans, as the outreaches will educate the person on animal rights very thoroughly and thereafter hold the person accountable by using the Socratic Method. Using the Socratic Method means asking the person a chain of questions, affirming their stance on a topic, getting the person to embrace their own empathy for animals with their own answers instead of demanding it from them. This conversation may be the first time the person is thoroughly educated on animal rights, but most importantly, starting to see the issue from the lens of the victim instead of basing their decision on their own self-interest. As I'm sure the others will expand on later in the workshop, outreaches are encouraged to only talk to those who stop and show genuine concern and curiosity. This ensures that the person they are talking to will most likely be open and honest, which is all that is required to see the self-evident nature of ethical veganism.
Okay, I hope you'll enjoy that. I think that's a really great video. I want to thank Michael, even though he isn't here, for that video. Great introduction and good little overview to get us started. Okay, our next speaker is Amanda Murphy. Amanda is an AAM mentor, activist, and an organizer with AV from Ohio. So she's up next. Amanda, take it away.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I am going to share my screen. Bear with me. I am working a new device here, so it takes me a moment here. Okay, and just let me know when you see that. Oh, probably should go to the front. Can you see my screen? Am I still on mute?
We hear you and
Okay.
see your screen. Yep.
Okay, so it's weird when I can't see myself either. So I'm going to go over a few specifics regarding the AV cubes and about the artistic demonstration of it, responsibilities as an organizer, and like the different, like what a cuber and an outreacher does. To introduce myself, as Michelle said, my name is Amanda Murphy. I am an AAM mentor and an organizer for the AV Dayton, Ohio chapter. There's a few things that I've done. I've been an activist for over 4 years now and vegan for almost 5. There's some things that I've done over the course of time, and excited for future events like the AAM Atlanta Assembly coming up in February. I'm so excited for. So I hope that I get to see some of you there. But most importantly, I wanted to touch on AV as the Dayton organizer. I became an organizer because AV and street activism, showing footage, is actually my favorite form of activism. And I'll go into that a little more later. So as an organizer, some of the duties that we have is we kind of work within Facebook, the majority of our work. So we have a chapter that we manage. So we engage with our volunteers within that Facebook group. We also launch events through AV. We don't physically do the launch, AV does, but then we post to our volunteer group. The idea is to do at least one a month, but sometimes in the summertime, we've done as many as once a week, because we usually have a free music venue downtown in Dayton, Ohio, where they do free concerts 4 days a week over the weekend. So it's a great opportunity, and we always have a great turnout with conversations at that event. We also do a pre and a post brief before the event. I'll go into a little bit of that later. We also do workshops and check-ins and answer questions for any of our volunteers. If you join one of the chapters, you could pretty much go in Facebook, look up any state or city that you're in, and AV and then the city. And if there's one in the city, it will pop up. And typically in there, there's a lot of information about the cubes as well in an announcement post. So we want to make sure that people are reading those and understanding what AV does, because there is a certain structure to what we do. We also set up the actual cubes for the events that we do and help our volunteers and the flow of the workshop, making sure, or not workshop, I'm sorry, pardon me, the cube, making sure that volunteers get breaks and, things like that to help them be at their best for however long the cube is. Sometimes they're 2 hours to 4 hours. It depends on the cities and how many volunteers there are. Also, depending on what kind of devices one uses, our chapter actually has 2 TVs set up. So I also make sure that the battery pack that we use is charged the night before, as well as the speaker that we use for the music. AV has a music playlist that we use. I use the one on Spotify because my husband and I have the premium. So there's no ads to take away from the music, but the music that they use helps set emotion to what people are seeing on the screens. Very similar to what you experience in a movie when they have that just right music that the director puts in so you can have an emotional connection to whatever's going on the screen. It's very similar with the music. So we don't actually have the animals, the screams that they may have during the footage, that's quiet, but we have the music to kind of help bring that element of emotions to the event. We also make sure our chapters have what they need. When I started as an organizer, I wanted to make sure that our chapter was strong. And so I stepped up as an organizer. As soon as I did a fundraiser and we started getting funds to help buy the things that we needed, like signs and masks. And for the TVs, our chapter did get approved, and half of our TVs, that was about $500 to set up the 2 TVs, and half of that was paid for by AV funds. So we got approved to actually be paid from AV funds to help us pay for that. And that can be, you can use TVs, tablets, computers, other things that we use can be speakers, masks, and lanyards, items like that. We look at our cubes as an artistic demonstration. We use the Guy Fawkes masks to structure and ignite curiosity, to have bystanders be curious on what we're doing, and it helps them come up to us and engage. We don't chase people down. We don't, like with leafleting, we're not passing things out to every person that walks by. We'd only engage with people, like Michael said in his video, we only engage with people who come up and genuinely want to chat with us. The mask signifies social injustice and takes away the volunteer's identity and brings light to what's on the screen, which is the animals, because that's why we do what we do. Is AV is very focused on the animals as well. With the music, as I had mentioned before, I guess I kind of jumped the gun on that, but the music that we use sets the tone for the demonstration. And we also have a uniform of black, as much black as possible. They want all black because when you dress in a uniform, you look very more professional, I should say. So we always ask for all black to be worn as well. With the cube size, ideally, we want to have equal sides for the cube. The picture that you see here, it is a 4-person cube. That's a good cube in our city. A lot of times we just have a 2-person cube. And ideally, though, we want it to be equal on all sides. That would be like by 4s, 4, 8, 12, etc. Sometimes, though, you have to work with the volunteers that you have. Like I said, we typically have a 2-person cube, and then there's at least 1 outreacher. But I've done many cubes where we've just had one screen and then doing outreach. And if the person, you always have to be mindful of your volunteers as well to see if they don't want to outreach. You have to make sure that you're making adjustments. If the only volunteer you have, I've had that before, where the only volunteer I have doesn't do outreach, she doesn't want to do outreach, then we go as long as we can, and you do your very best. There's also something that we call the matrix, which is like something from Matrix with the red pill, blue pill. We actually bought these glass, I want to call them glass rocks, but there's blue and red, and we always have those on hand because you never know, and it's an option that we can utilize to help help with those conversations. So when it comes to cubes, we have cubers and outreachers. The cubers stand straight, holding the device, whether it be a computer. As you can see in the picture, we have televisions that use straps, so you technically can be hands-free. You hold still, and there, if you're inside the cube, since it's looked at as an artistic demonstration, we typically don't have conversations from the cube. And the cubers, that's usually where our new volunteers start, to let them see how the cube flows. And if they're interested in becoming an outreacher, shadowing is like their next step. So when they're out on breaks, shadowing the person that is doing outreach is always good in building that experience, as well as doing the AV specific workshops as well that we have. And then you have the outreachers, as you can see. That's the vegan sheepdog, Chris Peed. He's one of our volunteers, if you know him. He's doing outreach in that conversation. And again, mentioning before, we only engage with people who engage with us first. So he obviously, someone had come up and he's having a conversation. From this angle in the picture, you can't see the screen very well, but typically with those screens, you can see a little better in person. But they engage and use the Socratic method when talking and engaging with bystanders, bringing them, Michael mentioned it in his video as well, bringing them to their own vegan conclusion, asking them questions that make them think about their answers, like how it's making them feel, and making that connection to help stimulate an emotional connection to the screens and the images that they're seeing on the screens. So as a side note, I added this just to mention that we also do table events at like Veg Fest. This is actually at the Veg Bash that happened this past, I think it was September-ish, August, September. And we got a free table. A lot of times, if you're a nonprofit, some of these places will give you a table for free. This was a free table we had for 2 days. And the two ideas of the table is, if you have vegans that come by, it's informing the message and to get them to be active for the animals. And then at Veg Bash, there's actually more non-vegans than vegetarian or vegans, I noticed, but it's informing them and letting them know of our message and asking them the same kinds of questions that we do at a cube. But we don't show the footage like we do at the cube. But we want to still engage with them and try to get them to a vegan conclusion, similar to what we do at the cubes. In closing, this is a recent quote from Paul Bashir, one of the co-founders and directors of AAV. He says, "Don't be the vegan that non-vegans and other vegans want you to be. Be the vegan that the animals need you to be." And with that, I will pass it back over to Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. That was a really powerful quote that you closed with from Paul Bashir, the founder of AV, and that was extremely informative. So I hope people are learning already. And if you want to put in the chat, if you're familiar with AV or if you're hearing this information for the first time, we'd love to know. Anyway, our next speaker and our next presenter is our guest speaker, Louise Correal. He is he's an AAM mentor and an organizer with AV and the SAVE movement. So go ahead, Louise.
Hello, everybody. My name is Louise. I reside in Atlanta, Georgia, but I'm originally from Colombia in South America. And I've been vegan for almost 4 years now. It's going to be next month. And I'll be an activist almost 4 years as well, maybe a few months apart. I started after I went vegan. And, ever since then, I also became an organizer because I was just so excited to do activism. Actually, the reason why I went vegan is because I saw Joey Carbstrong, if you're familiar with him. He's an activist from Australia, and he was doing a outreach on a Cube of Truth, and I saw it on YouTube. I just saw it, and I was just so passionate about it, but I wasn't vegan, and I was just like, I want to do that, but I'm not vegan, so my actions weren't in alignment with what I wanted to do. So that's what inspired me to go vegan, and I think that's one of the reasons why street activism is so important, is because that inspired me to do, you know, everything I've done for the past 4 years. So just seeing somebody else speak up for such a worthy, important cause, and just having already seen footage of what happens to animals was like already, you know, powerful. But then seeing somebody like taking that cause and getting out in the streets and talking to people about it and wanting to see a change was what truly made the difference for me. And so ever since then, I've been organizing Cubes of Truth with Anonymous for the Voiceless, and then with the Save Movement, we do squares, which is a very similar format than the cubes, and vigils as well, which is, you know, going to a slaughterhouse with signs and bearing witness to the animals that are in the trucks and acknowledging them for the sentient individuals that they are before their last moments on this planet, because that's probably all the acknowledgement that they will have as sentient beings before they go. And the powerful thing about that is that doing different forms of activism, like for instance, vigils, they might be very difficult to bear witness to the animals, but at the same time, I think that also helps you to see face to face the very animals that you're fighting for, and you're bearing witness to their suffering. You're acknowledging them physically, and also, yeah, it just also helps you just be a better activist, in my opinion, or a more well-rounded activist. And that could also just be doing other forms of activism. Like marches are very powerful. I also helped organize the first animal rights march here in Atlanta. And those can be, you know, help you kind of like join your community, and they're very hyped. So you just get very hyped with the marches and with different types of protests. So I know that everybody has their own favorite type of activism. Mine is street activism, doing outreach. I love doing that. But I also like to stretch myself and get out of my comfort zone. Matter of fact, doing outreach wasn't something that like I was super comfortable with, because naturally I'm an introvert and I keep to myself a lot, but I wanted to step out of that comfort zone because I just felt pulled so strongly for the cause of speaking up for the suffering of the billions of animals that are killed, murdered every year, that I have to do it. And I encourage you guys to do the same, to, you know, whether that street activism or go to a vigil or a disruption or a march or whatever that is. It's going to help you speak for animals better, in my opinion. And also, yeah, just be a better, more well-rounded activist and help other chapters, other organizations, and so on and so forth. And so I think street activism is powerful, effective, and important. And for me, I really like it because I can see people's thought patterns being changed live. Like basically in front of you, sometimes you'll see like somebody it just clicks for them that what they're seeing on the screens of the footage of the animals is real and that is wrong. And like, it's crazy to think how the majority of those people have never even seen that footage in their entire life. It's just been hidden away by the industries, by all the propaganda. And we, the activists, are the ones who take the streets and show these people what happens. And they're just in shock. And sometimes you see people just, they're just very shocked, and like they will go vegan on the spot. Or, you know, so that's what can be very rewarding, that you can facilitate that process and in helping animals in that way. And then I can understand how people can feel discouraged doing that, because they can see the opposite. They can see people mocking the suffering of the animals, talking about plants having feelings, and all those objections that we are so used to. But so, you know, it's like you get two sides of the spectrum. But I think the important thing to remember while we do outreach is that we are just there to plant seeds and to show the footage, which a lot of the times, like for me, when I saw the footage, I didn't have anybody doing outreach to me. I just saw the footage on YouTube, and that spoke volumes to me. Like it just clicks, you know. But I think even as powerful as the footage is, outreach is the other part of the equation that helps us kind of just marry that in helping people. Because when you see that footage, sometimes you just feel really sad, you feel confused, and you don't know what to do. And so we're there to help people make the connection and empower them to know that they can make a change and they can be part of the solution, rather than, because if they don't, every day that those people aren't vegan, they're being part of the of why those animals are in that screen. And that's basically why we're there, to empower people and hold them accountable and be like, you know, if you aren't vegan, this is what you're paying for. And I think it's important to do outreach in a way that it's empowering, holds them accountable, but is not talking down on them in a way like angrily. Because I think it, you know, as human beings, our psychology, we just like become very defensive if we think somebody's attacking us. So if we are kind, and we can empathize with people, because I would have liked somebody to tell me about what happened to animals and how I can help and how I can be changed. But I wouldn't have wanted somebody to tell me I was a bad person, because I didn't know any better. And I think most of us can forget at times that we have only been vegan for a few years, or maybe longer. Maybe some of you guys have been, I know Mark, you have been vegan for 23 years, and that's amazing. But yeah, I mean, sometimes I think we forget that people haven't, we haven't been vegan for most of our lives. And so with that, we ask people questions rather than telling them animal abuse is wrong. We lead them through a line of questioning that makes them realize that animal abuse is wrong, because most people already believe that. But when people come to their own conclusions on their own through a line of questioning, they're more likely to make that change, because they're realizing those conclusions on their own by the questions that we ask. And most people aren't used to thinking about these issues. I didn't think about those issues for over 20 years of my life. So when we pose those questions, those powerful questions, to making people realize why those animals are on those screens and how they can change, it can be very powerful. And we can, with those line of questions, we can also handle the objections. And then we give them the cards, which the cards sometimes also, with human psychology, we may think that our conversation or the footage didn't affect somebody. But maybe they just don't want to admit that something they have believed their entire lives that is wrong. Like, people don't want to be told, like, you, like, especially about a stranger, like everything that you believe is wrong. And so with the cards, people can go home, do their own research, look up the documentary. So the cards with the resources that we give during outreach are very powerful for that reason. It helps people do their own research afterwards. And if we give them a strong enough why they should go vegan, which is for the animals, obviously, to stop the suffering, they'll find the how just with the cards or with a few clicks on Google. And so I think it's very important to understand that personal transformation of individuals is empowering for them and the network of people that they speak with, their friends, their family, which also can ignite more conversations with their friends and their family, and so on and so forth. And it's just a ripple effect that can create activists. And, you know, just to wrap up, I want to talk about the 100 monkey experiment. And basically what this experiment was is that there were some monkeys in a small island in Japan that some scientists gave them potatoes. So the monkeys like the potatoes, but they had sand in the potatoes. So some monkeys went and washed the potatoes from the sea. They were trying to teach other monkeys to do that. And then next thing you know, like 100 monkeys were doing it. And next thing you know, all the monkeys in the other small islands in Japan were doing it. And then it also translated to the mainland of Japan. And so that can happen. That kind of change can also happen in our society, you know, like the 3.5% rule. So the 3.5% of us are activists that can create a domino effect that can make changes happen for animals in a political level, in a socioeconomical level as well. And so the more activists we have, the better. So we want to encourage people to go vegan, but also have them understand that that's a neutral position, and that the next step is to encourage them to get active for the animals. And yeah, that's why I think street activism is important, powerful, and impactful for us to do and for us to encourage others to do. So with that, I pass it back to Michelle.
Louise, thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was really, that was powerful. Some great reminders, and you're right, street activism is so, so important. That's why we do it. So I know we're learning a lot so far, and we're going to go to our next speaker. Our next speaker is, our final presenter is Paulo Smith. She's our guest speaker, and she is an activist and an organizer with AV. So Paola, go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Michelle. So as she mentioned, I am an activist. I've been vegan for, I'll just say, over a decade. And I think really relevant and important here, I do different things for activism. I do AV organizer. I've been organizer for vigils. I do fur demonstrations in New York City. I work on a lot of footage and editing stuff behind the scenes and organizing different other events. I like to do a lot of things behind the scenes, but for tonight, I think it's really important to, I want to point out for me, the reason I even became active, despite being vegan for several years, is because I saw, one of the documentaries, and it was the footage for me that actually made me become super active. Before that, I was going to maybe circus protests here and there, but the urgency wasn't as frontline for me. It was after I saw a documentary. And when I saw the footage, because I was one of these people who always said, I can never watch the footage of what happens to the animals. And I know a lot of people out there are like that too. And I was very much like that. When I became vegan on my own. I sadly didn't have anyone who came up to me and told me, look at this, look at that. I was online, and I was basically doing research, reading things, because I couldn't actually watch these images or the videos of what happens to animals. I was that sensitive about it. And finally, I did watch the documentary that showed me very graphic footage, and I sobbed and sobbed as I watched it. And I left. As I was walking to my car, I was already writing in my note on my phone, because I use my phone for my notes, writing what I was going to do for activism. And the reason I tell that story is because humans, we're very much so out of sight, out of mind. To just think about other relationships we have with friends, we don't see them anymore. We don't really think about them. We happen to see them like, oh my God, I forgot about this person, or I forgot about that story on the news, or so on and so forth. When we see things in front of us, that's when things kind of like become urgent. And unfortunately for the animals, there's an urgency every second of every day. And as we're living our lives as humans with our privilege to not be abused in this same way, we don't have that front and center. And that's very natural. It's human nature. But for me, watching the footage is what made all the difference in the world to become active. And so I still feel it's very powerful. I know a lot of people say, and it might not be, what everyone says, but people say like, oh, I'm already vegan, I don't need to watch that. And I like when people say that, and I invite you all to challenge people who do say that and who are not active, challenge them a little bit about that, because there might be some room there for them to become more active for the animals if that urgency is front and center. So that's why I wanted to mention that, because I think that's really important. And that leads to the footage that we show on the streets. It's the same idea as Amanda and Louise were talking about. You can get a lot of very impactful conversations when you have footage playing in the background. It's very different. I have clubs on Clubhouse. I do rooms on there. If you don't know, it's an app that's about, you're basically talking to people, but there's no visual. You can't see videos or anything. And it's a very different way of doing activism. But having the footage is so incredibly powerful because it gives you a way to really have honest, serious, straightforward conversations with people that other scenarios might not give you the opportunity to do. So please take that into account as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a couple of things that we do for AV. So I am one of the organizers, and I think my co-organizer was here. Yeah, there she is, Lauren. We're the organizers for the New York City chapter. I actually have been doing cubes since AV was founded in 2016. I've been doing them since 2017, and I became organizer of New York City in 2018. So I've been doing this for quite some time, and I've learned a tremendous amount. It's so valuable, and that's why I love hearing from everyone who's in this room who has experience in different things, because you do learn so much when you're actually out there doing the work and like talking to people and having these conversations and understanding what's effective and what's not. And so I'm going to actually just bring up a few slides. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Hold on 1 second. Right. Let me know if you can. I think you guys can see that. Yes, someone thumbs up. Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you. All right, so AV, so I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about the outreach that AV does specifically at the cubes. As people mentioned, there's different ways to do street activism. AV, after many years of doing this and having multiple events and talking to so many people out there, is trying to streamline a little bit the questions that we ask people and the way that we approach bystanders on the street based on what we have found to be more effective in not making us feel good, but actually getting results in the sense of hearing back from people who are like, oh, I'm vegan now after I had this conversation, or that was a rough conversation, but it made me think, and I thought about it later, I became vegan. And these things happen. Like I get messages from New York City, people who find me on Facebook, and they say these things to me all the time. And so it's real, it's true, it happens. I have people in my chapter who rolled through as a non-vegan. I saw them become vegan, then become an activist. I just got someone join our group who just became vegan a couple of months ago from one of our cubes at Washington Square Park, and now he wants to join and become active. So the way we talk to people is effective, and that's why we like to ask members to watch these workshop videos that Paul has done, and you can find them on YouTube. So I'll just say AV has an outreach workshop that we highly encourage activists to follow. A lot of the times people don't know, and we don't expect people to just show up to cubes and be magical, like people, right? Like I think Louis mentioned he's introverted. I'm extremely introverted. The only reason I ever felt the need to talk to people and do events and stuff was for the animals. That's all that drives me to do anything. I don't even like sharing pictures of myself online. If you look at my profile, I don't do that. It's just not who I am. But I've become this person for the animals because I feel like that's a good way to reach people. So this workshop, we try to help people find that way of talking to people where they might not be used to talking to people, but here's like an outline, try to follow this and ask these questions, try it out. Because what I found when I started doing this particular workshop protocol and outline, I was like, I don't know if I feel comfortable doing that. But when I did it, I found that people were very responsive. I thought people would respond in a negative way. And it was the opposite. Like they were being called on some things that someone else hasn't, and they took that seriously. And that was very powerful. So as you can see here, and I think Amanda mentioned it as well, chapters have their own individual workshops. So we are provided these PowerPoints, these slides, in order for us to do our own workshops. In the New York City chapter, Lauren and I have done a few workshops, and they've been excellent because you can talk one-on-one to members, do like mini trials and like, try it out basically. But in any case, if you don't have, like, I just highly encourage you, like, just look for chapters near you. And if they're having a workshop or other chapters, to join it. And if you just want to see the Paul's version when he does online. You could just go on YouTube and it's under this title here, Holding Non-Vegans Accountable. It's a 2.5 workshop, summary and example. So 2.5 workshop is the latest workshop he has put out. There's a 2.0, two versions of that, 2.5, the latest one. And what that indicates is there's an evolution, right? Because we never stop learning. And so we're always trying to learn what's better and try to streamline and make things better. So I highly recommend this version because there are examples in the actual video of points that he makes, and then he puts examples of real outreach conversations and how they go. So it's really helpful. Okay, so something I want to say, and I'm going to go over a few slides from the workshop that talk about our specific outreach protocol, like what we like to say. I'm not going to go into too much details because that's the workshop, but I just wanted to show some of the slides. But I just want to be clear that we should always try to advocate an accurate message for the animals and watch that line between being respectful and pandering. The reason we say that is because human conversations, again, they go on, and when we're talking to people we don't know, it's always like we're polite, we're nice, that's great, cool. But we always have to remember the message we want to share for the animals. And it's a very serious message, right? It's a message about death. And so, and suffering and torture and how these people are contributing to it. So there's a line, right? There's a very easy way you can be respectful to people, but you don't have to back off on your message. And what I mean by that is one of the things that people sometimes do is, as AV, we always say we don't advocate for reducitarianism. We don't advocate for vegetarianism in the same way that we wouldn't advocate for someone to go out there and do any other type of diet, because that's what vegetarianism is, right? So you wouldn't go out there and be a pescatarian if you're vegan activist, right? So just always remember that vegan is the message you kind of want to land with every person very clearly, and not reduce that powerful message because that person, you're afraid of how that person's going to respond. And there's a respectful way to do that, but you don't have to pander just so that person likes you or is okay with you or doesn't feel uncomfortable. I think it's great to make people feel uncomfortable. You don't have to attack them. You don't have to be nasty to them, but make them think. Thinking is what gets people to change, to question their own behavior. So just keep that in mind. There's also something I'll mention a couple of things here and there about neuroscience. So if you actually, neuroscience wise, it's been shown when you're trying to get people to change behavior, there's certain things you need. You need a clear motivation. You need certain things that goes into a whole different topic. But one of the things that you don't want, regardless of what you're trying to get someone to do, is have too much congratulations. So when we talk to people on the streets and we're talking to them and they're like, oh yeah, I don't eat that much meat. And then we naturally, I used to do this too. I would say, oh, that's so good. Oh my goodness, that's great. And it's like, you're so happy that, oh my God, they're not, but we're missing a beautiful opportunity there to point out that even that little bit they're eating, that animal still died, right? And so that's what I mean about that line, right? And so what happens, the neuroscience part that I mentioned is actually dopamine release. When people, even if it's something like, okay, I want to go and I don't know, lose weight. I want to lose 20 pounds. And I'm so excited to lose 20 pounds and all this and this and that. And everyone just keeps telling, no, you're doing great. You're doing great. You're wonderful. You're wonderful. But I'm not actually working for it. I'm not doing anything to reach that goal, right? What happens is you do get a release of dopamine, and this is neuroscience. You get a release of dopamine, which is a reward center in your brain. And what that does is it makes it actually easier for the person to not follow through with actions because they got the reward already. They got people telling them they did a great job. You're awesome. You're so good. You're a vegetarian. Amazing. So they're like, oh, this is great. I got my dopamine release. It's all good. So just keep that in mind. There is some neuroscience behind it too. So I wanted to mention that briefly. All right, so I'm going to scroll. These are some of the slides I cut and paste straight from the workshop. So I'll say a little bit of the typical outreach structure. And so basically, like they said, we don't chase after anyone to talk to us. We want to talk to people who are ready, right? It's a filter. Our demonstrations are filters for people who stopped, who became engaged, and who want to know more. Those are the people we want to talk to. And so if they do stop, you want to ask them, do you want to know why we're here? That engages them, and it gets them to basically commit to a conversation with you. If they say no, then see you later, and then you move on to the next person, because you don't want to waste time talking to someone or pleading with someone to talk to you when they're not interested. That's not who you want to reach. There's 5 other people who may be walking up who are ready for the message. So don't waste your time. Your time is valuable. Make it as effective as possible for the animals. So ask them those questions. Give them these responses, what we're doing, showing the reality of what happens to the animals, meat, dairy, egg industries, everything you see here, standard practice, and around the world. So that's one of the questions that we use to open a conversation, right? Then we go on to other questions. What are your feelings on animal abuse, right? And this gets them to, like, again, confirm a stance. Most people are gonna be like, I'm against animal abuse, right? So when you have someone say something like that, they're gonna wanna keep to that. And then they're gonna very quickly realize that there's inconsistencies in their behavior and what they're saying they believe in. So then that goes on to other questions, like, so it's safe to say you're against animal abuse. Those kinds of questions, basically the same line that you want them to confirm their stance. Ask them, this I think is like the best question. Do you think it's possible to be against animal abuse while demanding products like meat, dairy, and eggs? So when you're asking these questions, remember you have the footage happening behind you. And so that's what makes it so powerful, because when people are watching animals getting stabbed in the throat and they're understanding that this is the reality, it's a different ballgame. People are not going to give you the same objections. So then you go on to different things, depending on what the conversation's moving along as. What do you feel like would be stopping you from not abusing animals and being vegan? And this will lead to their objections. And so something important from this sentence right here is when it says, how do you feel? What do you feel like would be stopping you? Feel versus not what is stopping you. Because technically, most of the time, if you're talking to people here in these areas, nothing is stopping people from at least being as vegan as possible in any way that they can, right? And so when you're talking to them, they might be like, oh, I feel like this might be an issue, because we know most objections that people come up with, like lions and all this stuff, they're invalid, right? So right there is just a way to coax their objections, basically. So then you can go on to address them. And this goes on to objection handling. I won't get too much into this because this is a very fun topic where you'll hear all kinds of crazy things. And sometimes, people are just not being serious about it. But some people are. They actually have concerns. They think it's unhealthy. They think this or that. Definitely address that objection, but don't get sucked into this as a distraction. People are very, very sneaky with this. They basically, and it's not intentional sometimes, and sometimes it is if they're being trolled. But sometimes when we don't want to face something that we know is wrong that we're doing, we'll like just basically look at a different topic and start talking about, well, I heard it was bad for my health and da, 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 da. And meanwhile, the cow is being stabbed right in front of their eyes, right? And so on the footage, so we should focus back to that, address the objection, let them know they will be given resources to look this up further, but this is the case, move it forward, and always bring it back to the animals. You always want to bring it back to the animals, because you want to think how many people are out there who are not bringing it back to the animals, who are bringing it to every other topic in the world except for the animals. So be that person who is bringing it back to the animals, because that's what they need. So I'll move forward from this one. That's the next slide. Naturally, that's what I was saying. I like how it says, if they try to create excuses, they try to remove accountability, because that's what it is. Nobody wants to be accountable. For example, pointing to rural communities, lions, low-income families, etc. Don't get lost in this. Address it, but always remember not to get down that road of distraction. Place them in the victim's position. That's really important. When they're talking to you and they're talking about, Eskimos that live in Alaska, Bring it back to them. Are you an Eskimo? Do you live in Alaska? You're in New York City. Well, in my case, you're in New York City, Washington Square Park. You have an iPhone in your hands. Why are you talking about Eskimos in Alaska? Like you have to kind of realize that in your head and then take that conversation accordingly back to the animals. Say, yeah, that might not be who we're talking. We're actually talking to you. What do you feel about this? Bring it back to them, make them give you an answer, not divert the accountability. And then you want to tie in the benefit. So of course you want to say, you know, the benefit of being vegan is the animals are no longer being abused by you or by your actions, what you're doing, etc. However the conversation is going. And then let me move to the next one because I think, yeah, no, actually this one is. So you say the number one benefit, so this is our thing, the number one benefit of going vegan for the animals, the benefit is that they no longer have to be tortured and abused because of you. For you, the number one benefit, if you say you are against animal abuse and what you see on the screens, then when you're vegan, you no longer have to be a hypocrite. And when I first read this, I was like, ooh, I can't call people hypocrites. That's not going to come across right. But it does, because you've already worked up. And again, these are slides from the workshop. There's the whole workshop that basically creates the conversation. And so when you're in this conversation with people, you've worked up to a point where you're able to say something like this and they're going to agree with you because you've already lent that point. You've already made it clear that you would be a hypocrite because they've already said the stance of being, you know, morally against animal abuse. So that's the other thing. And then you want to close the conversation, always asking them, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do? Ask them directly. What are you going to do about this? Because then they have to give you a response and they might say, I might decrease it, whatever. And then you have to kind of address that. But again, you can close the conversation with a statement, which is the next thing we say, like, just remember, you know, if you're going to just try to decrease or this isn't clear to you yet, you're going to be contributing to this. This is, you are responsible for what's happening on these screens that you said you're not responsible for. And so this is a more direct but totally respectful conversation you can have with people. And if you go to our website, anonymousforthevoiceless.org, or you go to our YouTube channel, there's a lot of examples there of different outreaches that use this same protocol, the same outline. And you go on our website, you can actually find a chapter near you. And if there is no chapter near you, you can create a chapter, which is awesome. So anyone out there can actually do this, regardless of where you live. So the last thing I'll say is, don't let anyone tell you that outreach is not important. Education is very crucial so that people can change. It's like education is crucial for every other topic. And just like other social justice movements, no one would ever say it's not important to educate people about this. So keep that in mind and understand how important it is for us to be out there. There's all kinds of different activism. That's great. We can do a lot of things, but this is also a crucial one. So I'll end it there. Thank you so much. Michelle, back to you.
Wow, that was really amazing, Paola. That was a great presentation. I can tell why you're such an amazing outreacher, and there was so many amazing nuggets for our activists in that. So those are our presenters, and now I'm going to open it up to questions and answers from our panelists today. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand. And I'll ask you to unmute, or you can place your questions in the chat. We did already have one question from Shreya. Shreya, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. I think I had another one, but we can get to it later. My first one was about strategic locations for cubes and squares. Like, for example, you're showing footage of animals in slaughterhouses. Like, do you typically want it to be in a, like, so sure, there are other events, you can be in a busy intersection, etc., but how powerful is it to be, you know, in front of a grocery store or at like a food fest or a market where people are probably going to be actually purchasing these products, like a restaurant where they're going to go eat. Are you able to speak to the success of different locations?
I can jump in and answer that. Yeah, so I can give you my perspective on it. So yeah, you do want locations in general that have heavier foot traffic, but also you don't want too heavy foot traffic. There's usually not a problem in most places, but example, New York City, when pre-pandemic, we would never do a cube in Times Square. It's incredible. There's a lot of people there, but it's incredibly difficult to hear a conversation or have something without the distraction of like 5 billion TVs around, the lights, the Chewbacca's dressed up trying to get pictures. It's just a lot. And you want to create a place where you have your music, you have the people walking through, you have a space to speak to people and have those conversations. What I would mention, the ones that we have here are at Washington Square Park, mostly when it's nice outside, because it does have a good steady flow of foot traffic, and we are right by universities. So that's a tip I would give is that try to be, if you can, around universities. You have a lot of students there who are more open to change and who are willing to just change on the spot or just have heard of it before, more willing. So I would say that. And then a side tip, if you have a place that has coffee shops and food, I do think that's a good idea. For neuroscience reasons, one of the other things they think that is really helpful when you want people to change behaviors for people to be alert. And in order to be alert, you have your caffeine, you have your epinephrine going from that caffeine hit from coffee shops, right? But also, there's a study that came out that says when you get people to think about their choices regardless of which behavioral change you want them to make, if you get them to think about that change as they're doing the behavior, it is incredibly powerful and they're more likely to change. So if you have someone think, if they're literally eating in front of you, which I know a lot of people are like, so gross, so disrespectful, but that's actually really good because they're going to be seeing that footage as they're eating and you're going to be telling them what they're contributing to. And that's what studies have found is really strong motivator. If you think about when I keep bringing up weight loss thing, like diets and stuff, because that's what the examples usually show for these neuroscience studies. If you get someone to think, or even like any food that you want to stop eating, an amazing vegan cake that you just can't get enough of, because I have that problem, and you're like, okay, I need to stop eating so much of this, not good for me. If you start while you're eating that cake and you're like, why do I want to not eat this cake so much? Because it's not good for me. I don't feel good. It makes me feel blah. All these things you're thinking as you're doing it, next time you're less likely to actually eat that cake, or at least you're going to think about it before you do it. So that's just what I wanted to mention. Thanks.
And I can add on to what Paola said. All the ones that you mentioned, Shreya, here in Dayton, Ohio, we're a small city in Ohio. We are a city, but it's very small. Our skyline's not that big. But one of our places we do the most, like all year long, is actually at a corner in front of a restaurant. And the owner hates when we do this. He comes out and we hear snide remarks and stuff like that. But, you know, we get along well with the police in our city, and they're very supportive of what we do. And that can be different with each city. I know I don't think we really hit on that too much. But it's always good to know what's, you know, public property. That's imperative. And a lot of times universities, if it's a public university, you can do activism as the, you know, First Amendment right on public property. Sometimes there might be forms you have to fill out. I know here in Dayton at Wright State University, you have to fill out a form. But when we just did our, what was the one we had in November? Oh my goodness, it just slipped my mind. So we had a big event. Paola, did you want to tell me? I'm slipping my mind.
You mean the Unity Cube or the?
Not Unity, AV, the one we had in November. Well, we had a big event, I'll just say that. And so we wanted different location in the same busy street. So during the summer, they actually shut the whole street down since the pandemic. And, everybody can eat outside the restaurants. Well, we went one block down because I just didn't want to deal with the guy in this restaurant. Well, it turns out there was a diner across the street, and the owner came over and engaged with us and said, hey, the bathroom, water, whatever you guys need, come over and see me. We outreached him, and he actually is looking at advancing his menu and changing menu items. So as was mentioned, we want foot traffic. So we usually find places by, parking lots in between where people are going. If there's events locally in the city, like I said, we have a pavilion, an outdoor pavilion, literally right in the center of Dayton. And they do free concerts Thursday to Sunday every week during the summer. And we just pick a corner, and, we usually have really good foot traffic and conversations with people. Other ones that we do, there might be a specific event. Usually we do the Christmas tree lighting in Dayton, and a lot of times they have like a petting zoo that's there as well, and horse-drawn carriages in the parade. So those are good talking points as well to bring light to those animal atrocities as well, because it's just not safe for any of them, and it's just wrong, in my opinion. And so anywhere that you can, that's public property, unless you have other permissions, and has heavy foot traffic. I'm okay with being in front of a restaurant. That doesn't bother me. I like the neuroscience behind that as well. It makes me feel like, we're picking good spots. But it just all depends on each individual city. I've traveled around and done, I've done a cube in New York during an anniversary cube, I believe it was, in Chicago, and all these cities that I've done activism in. You just got to find that little place that you get that steady foot traffic. So that's my little addition to that as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Louise, do you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I think what they said was pretty much on point. I try to look for err on the side of what Paola was talking about, like a steady flow of people, but not overwhelmingly amount of people, because then it just becomes too difficult to have those conversations. But yeah, just a good amount of foot traffic is the number one. And if you have that on top of key locations, that's also really great. And we happen to do our cubes, squares, by a vegan restaurant that's like 50 steps away from where we do it. So it's easy to be like, hey, look, you can go right there. There's a vegan restaurant that you can try out. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Mark, you've had your hand up. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Can everyone hear me?
Oh, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. I think my connection went down during Louise's talk. So I had a question about briefings and debriefings. Like, I guess I know a lot of groups do briefings before and after these events. What does that typically involve? I've worked with a few different organizations, and it's kind of different, and it's not really consistent from even from chapter to chapter. So what is can everyone recommend on the panel?
So I can just briefly for me, we do briefings and debriefings afterwards. In the briefings prior to the cube, we're basically hopefully welcoming new members who are there, and they can ask any questions they have, but we are explaining the format of the cube, for instance, so that they all understand. As Amanda mentioned, there's different things that we do in order to create this artistic event that gets people's attention. And so we like to go over our different roles as far as being a person who's standing in the cube, what to do when you're standing there. Like, don't get distracted looking around too much because you're wearing the Guy Fawkes mask. So when people are looking at your mask and you're looking over there, they're going to look over there instead of looking at your TV for the animals footage. And so these are the little things that I would explain in the briefing beforehand, and basically explain the outreacher's role and the new people, what they would do, et cetera, ask if anyone has any questions, and basically ask people like who wants to start in the cube, and so on. I can give it to, well, I'll say briefly for the debrief. I don't know, Amanda, what you also do, but the debrief, we're basically going over, what I like to do is basically thank everybody for being there, making sure everyone understands that we can't do this alone. And the only reason that event happened is because we all showed up. And I like to point out to people that, these spaces would otherwise be empty had we not been there and doing what we did that night and talking to the people we talked to. And then I give an opportunity to any activists who had a good or a bad conversation, something they feel that people can learn from, and basically tell that story to the group so that we can all hear that and understand what conversations happened in that sense. And we also get really good feedback. Like people are like, oh my God, this person said they're vegan now. And they're just so excited. And so it really helps motivate people and understand what was just happening during this time. So I'll end there.
Ours are very similar that we do at ours. You just want to make sure you're giving people, especially if they didn't have the opportunity to actually read the announcement with like the explanation of everything that we do, you're setting an expectation of what's going to happen over the course of the event. We also do the thing after. Sometimes we have meals and we'll go and we'll have a vegan meal together, and kind of depending on what time of day, what day of the week, things like that. Doesn't always happen, but we have some veg friendly places around. So we always try to keep that in mind as well. And sometimes after, and then we might use that opportunity to go even deeper into our conversations on the different conversations that we had. One of the things I like about activism, street activism, in these conversations that we have, a lot of times you can see people process it, and you can see the whole process from them being hesitant all the way to possibly being vegan, and being able to share those stories with one another also helps, I think, motivate them to come back as well. I also put in there thanking everybody and making sure that they know we can't do this without them in my post. So after the cube, we'll also put pictures from the cube up in our volunteer group. And then I also go into, thanking everybody, making sure that they know we can't do this without you. You're very important to this, what we do. And that's just a little extra that I wanted to add. Thank you.
Real quick, Amanda, we also do food afterwards. It's very important because we do have a lot of places here in New York City, and it's like, who's coming to eat? Raise your hands. And it is a way to connect with the activists who just spent time doing activism. And it's really great because you're doing work for the animals, and then you get to go out and be social for a little while and discuss whatever you want to discuss. But it does help people create connections and not feel, a lot of these people feel alone, like, the activists, they don't know anyone else. If they're new, especially, creates a community, and then they get linked in to other events as well. That's a really important point.
And the networking as well. I didn't realize I was still unmuted. I apologize. But the networking too. So especially like when you travel and do, like, one of my goals has always been to do as many cubes in as many cities and as many states and as many countries as I can. I already have multiple states and at least 2 countries, so I'm getting there. And but networking as well, and having those meals and having those conversations with the volunteers is important in that too, especially just like was mentioned before as well. We learn from one another. So what one chapter does, it might be something we might not do or want to implement, as long as it falls within the structure of AV's guidelines. So thank you.
Louise, do you want to add anything to that about briefing and debriefing?
It's very similar for me. So welcoming new members, explaining them the format of the event, explaining how we do outreach, and at the end, thanking everybody for being there. Like Amanda and Paola were saying, going for food. I think yeah, it's a good form to community building, and it touches a little bit on. I just saw Mikey asking about how can we keep up attendance. I think that's also a great way to, because you develop a relationship with your local activists, you become friends, and they feel really comfortable with you. They know that not only are they gonna get to speak up for animals, but they're also gonna get to hang out with like-minded individuals afterwards, and share conversations, share ideas, talk about veganism, and maybe what's going on in their lives. So it helps with community building, and to foster that sense of friendship and camaraderie as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the for explaining that. I think it's important to just kind of welcoming people, thanking people, explaining them how the event goes, and also telling them, like, if feel free to be inside of the square or the cube as long as you want, take breaks whenever you want, because people are doing this out of their kindness of their hearts. They're not getting paid, and we're just there because we want a better, kinder world. And so showing gratefulness for the activists, just like Amanda and Paula were saying, those events wouldn't happen. We can organize them, but if nobody comes, it's kind of hard to have them. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Excellent. There was a question in the chat from Melissa. It's kind of an outreach conversation, I guess, for anybody who wants to answer. What if during a conversation, they claim that they can't eat a fully plant-based diet? How do you respond without supporting reductionism or vegetarianism?
So the way that I take those questions is basically ask them why they say they can't follow it. I don't like to assume, like, obviously that sounds like a health question, but I'll ask them why, let them state what it is. And then I will, explain if it's a health reason, well, this is what it is, et cetera, give them a few points on that. And then tell them, like, hey, I have really good resources for you that are going to be able to walk you through and answer any more questions you have. But you should know that this is doable, right? Because at the end of the day, what it comes down to, like, if people really want to do something, they're going to find a way to do it. And it's basically, if they're not just trying to come up with oh, well, I can't. I had that the other day. It wasn't at a cube, but someone at Petco saw my sweater and it said no difference, and it was a dog and a cow, and she's like, she was the lady at the register, I love your sweater. And I'm like, oh, thanks. And I was like, are you vegan? And she was like, no. And she was really confused, and she's like, oh, I thought she didn't say anything. And I was like, oh, you should be, I have a card for you. And she took my card because I had the AV card on me, and she was like, oh, I thought I didn't know that was a cow. And I'm like, oh, she's like, I'm a philosophical vegetarian. It's literally what she said to me. And I said, what does that mean? And she said, well, I'm anemic, so I can't eat. I need to eat animals, and I'm a very picky eater. And I'm like, okay, so at least she said the picky eater thing because she knows. And then she basically was gonna she took the card, and I was like, oh, give me my card back. I'm like, you need to make the next logical step, whatever. And I had a totally different conversation with her. But my point is, like, people will sometimes tell you what the accurate reasons are, and sometimes they won't. So depending on that, I always ask why they're saying that, address it, and then make sure they know they have resources. I did have one person 2 years ago. I just remember this one because she's actually politically very well-known person right now. And she showed up to a cube. I didn't know who she was. And she told me that I can't, I have, what did she say? I have to eat eggs for whatever nutrient. And I explained to her, I said, go get lab work, do this, do that. I gave her like what to do from my experience. And she wrote me a year later and was part of my group. I didn't realize she was part of the New York City chapter. And she said, after we had that conversation, I did exactly what you said. And you're absolutely right. I'm totally fine without the eggs. And I've been keeping up this and that. And I was able to hear that feedback. So just know that people who do want to do it, they'll do it. So just give them the resources. Yeah.
So I just want to acknowledge that Michael Davis is actually with us in the workshop, who is one of our presenters with the video we played. So hopefully, Michael, you can also join our panel if you want to add to answering any of the questions, or if anybody wants to direct their questions towards Michael or any other specific panelist. So Luis, do you want to add anything to that last outreach question of Amanda, or should we go on to the next question? We got some good ones.
I saw what Juan was saying in the chat, and that's a great point. Just referring them to the American Dietetic of Nutrition and all of the largest nutrition academies around the world that point to properly plant-based diet can be adopted in all stages of life by, even the elderly, infants, pregnant women, and everything else. And so the experts have come to that conclusion. Therefore, if you do a little bit more further research, you'll find that conclusion as well. And yeah, that's true. And then, like Paola was saying, just asking them more questions. Okay, well, what nutrient do you think that you're missing? And if you can maybe pinpoint quickly like what it is, or just lead them to a particular website like nutritionfacts.org, something like that, you'll find some, some really great information there that you can actually get those same nutrients in plant-based diet. And yeah, you never know what can happen. Like, that's amazing. Like Paula's story, like she became an activist. Like, it's wonderful. You just never know how like not giving up on people, basically what can happen. Something like they will become an activist and impact more people, and just the ripple effect goes on.
And if I could just add real quick too, when it comes to nutrients, a lot of times the biggest one we hear is protein. Oh, protein though. And once I did a lot of research on protein, I always ask people, well, where do you think protein comes from? Where does it originate? And they can never answer that question. So it's always an opportunity as well to let them know, protein originates. It comes from amino acids that originates in plants, because they're the only thing that can take nitrogen from the environment and make it the amino acid that our bodies then build. When we eat animal products, we actually have to break all that down to the amino acid level and then rebuild with only what we need. So it's interesting with that. And then it was also mentioned about having cards. That's one of the things that's always in my purse. I always have them in my car. I have them everywhere, because I never miss the opportunity to have a conversation with anyone, whether it be in a grocery store. And the AV cards, it just has a lot of great resources. So those are ones I always have handy. That way you always have something to give someone if you're having that great conversation. Let them be able to go and do the research more on their own. I pass.
Okay, cool. All right, Michael, if you want to chime in, you can just unmute. Otherwise, we'll go to another question. And Poppy had asked in the chat, how do you handle silent watchers? So people who just answer questions with maybe one word, or just or they just sort of refuse, I guess, to engage in the outreach conversation. How do you handle that?
If I feel that the conversation isn't really going anywhere, I might just hang tight and let them watch. I've had people that don't really want to talk, but they'll sit and watch the entire 20-minute video, and then they'll have a conversation. So they might not talk initially right away. They might actually be in shock, because sometimes these people are seeing these things for the first time, and they're kind of like just not even realizing this is what I'm paying for. So a lot of times, if they're not having really big conversations and they're not answering the questions, I'll just kind of hang tight and just let them do their thing for a little bit. But I'm there in case they say something, they ask a question. I still kind of, unless there's busier outreach, and then I'll still try to keep my eye on them as well. It just depends on how it's going. If you have conversations that aren't getting anywhere at all, or they're very hesitant, and you have another person engaging, sometimes I just try to do the, break off, and because sometimes those conversations do not go anywhere in my experience. I'll pass.
Awesome, thanks for adding that. So we're good. So Shreya also had put a question in the chat about what is a useful way to deal with trolls?
So
Yeah,
go
I'll
ahead,
take that
Michael.
one.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, there's only one thing that trolls want, it's recognition, and the more we give it to them, the more they feed off it. They crave it. It's mainly an attention thing. If they don't get any response, they'll either brush it off or they will wait until they get the response. They'll just keep on pushing. It's like children, when they annoy you, they want, all they want is attention. So as soon as you give it to them, they'll double down on what they're doing. But also it is a case by case thing. I have had sometimes where someone will say something like, oh, I love chicken nuggets. Maybe this is a bit specific to my demonstration in which where I say animals deserve to be abused, prove me wrong. But I literally went up to those kids and I talked to them and I said, oh, you agree with the sign then? You agree that animals deserve to be abused, don't you? But then they changed their mind. They said no. And after about a 15-minute conversation with them, they totally understood what I was talking about. So you got to really see the intent that those trolls have. Obviously, if they're just going to walk past the cube and just blurt out hate, obviously you're not going to want to engage, but you never know if you approach them. I'd say for a beginner, you definitely kind of want to just ignore those things. But if you have a lot of experience or you have a thick skin and there's no one else to talk to, go for it if you feel inclined to do so. Because yeah, you honestly never know. I've had that about 3 times where those people who initially start trolling end up actually being really receptive to the message, because that's the thing where the intent comes in. Because as a child, you don't know why you say the things you say sometimes. So you would just hop on the bandwagon and just say things like, oh, I love chicken nuggets. Honestly, if I was a 12-year-old kid in town and I saw these activists doing that, and I saw that other people were saying these things on TikTok in the comment section, because on the activist videos, that's a lot of the stuff you see, a lot of hate for activists, I would just mindlessly spout the same thing, to be honest, until I had a actual intellectual conversation into thinking about why I'm saying what I'm saying. Yeah, so it is case by case, but I'd say if you're beginning activism, you probably don't want to go there at all. That's more of something for someone with more experience. But yeah, it can happen.
Great ideas. Thank you, Michael. Anybody else want to add, Paola?
Yeah, I want to add, I agree with Michael. It is different types of trolls that do show up. And you have the ones who are in a one-on-one conversation. We've had very creative trolls in the past here in New York City. We've had people who come with, or a person who has come with actual like raw skinned rabbit and eaten the rabbit right by the cube. And what happened there was pretty interesting. And actually, obviously, we were all revolted and really upset by it. But what was happening is that the bystanders, the non-vegans who were standing around being talked to by other activists, they actually became really angry at the troll, and they themselves were outraged by the same action. So in other words, they weren't just offending us, they were offending the non-vegans who aren't used to seeing, a cute little rabbit skinned and being eaten raw. And so that actually turned people to be on our side, and they were like telling them to get out, whatever. And it became a little bit intense. But then I've also had a situation where there was a different troll, and he came doing a live video. So there was one guy who basically put out a message telling several people to troll events. And so we had one guy who showed up doing a live video and purposely trying to disrupt the entire event, which is a different type of troll versus the one-on-one conversation. And so what I did in that scenario is that I kind of used it to my advantage because he kept following me. And so what I did is I stood right by one of the screens and I said, absolutely, point that camera right at me right now. Like, yes, please show everyone what the animals are going through, show everyone. And so he was getting very uncomfortable. And that's all I kept telling him, show everyone, everyone can see what's happening to the animals. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing our message to all your followers. I really appreciate it. And I just kept doing that. And then he like kind of put away the camera and he was like, I'm sorry, like I didn't, whatever, I didn't want to do all that, but he was just being super annoying. But that's how I dealt with it when he did have a live. So I kind of saw it like when people come to our cubes and they're taking pictures and doing video for their own Instagram accounts, I see it as an opportunity of exposure. As long as it's not like a violent situation, I say, absolutely, yeah, let's like come right here. I'll stand in front of the videos. I always keep that in mind, that the footage is coming up in the background. So that's a thing to always keep in mind as well. But as far as the one-on-ones, I do think it's an absolute waste of time unless you do have some kind of benefit coming out. If you think you can reach that person, then they're not really a troll. If they're literally just trolling you, like I wouldn't waste my time. And I feel like just ending the conversation, thank you so much, I'm done with this conversation, and walking away. And I've done that many times, and our activists have too. There's people who come who are drunk or on drugs, and we've had to call police on people, which is actually really helpful here. The police do come out and they will remove people who are disrupting our cube. But if it's a one-on-one and it's a troll, I end the conversation because I'm expending my emotional energy on these people, and it's putting me in a different space. And now I'm missing an opportunity to speak to 5 other people who I could have talked to, who were open to the message and would have like had a good conversation. I would have felt good about it. It would have been most effective. So totally depends. If you have a mic on you and you feel it's like going to be useful somehow and you're going to throw it up online, that's different. Depends on the troll, but that's personally what I do.
Awesome. Okay, great. I think in the interest of time, we'll go to the next question, but if Amanda or Louise have anything to add to that answer, go ahead and put it in the chat. Still would love to know how you handle trolls. Great answers. So Juan, you have had your hand up. If you want to ask or unmute.
Hi, thank you. First of all, can you all hear me? Yes? Okay, great. No, just you guys are all awesome. Thank you for this. I'm an organizer here in South Florida for the Miami chapter. And I just wanted to add real quick something that we do in the debriefing that I think is very helpful is to offer an opportunity to our volunteers. Maybe 1 or 2 volunteers can share an outreach conversation experience that they had with the group. That always kind of engages everybody, and I feel like it's good for community building for them to do that. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that. And then real quick, one other thing I just wanted to share for those that are on their phone or haven't seen the chat. Anonymous for the Voiceless, as some of you may have known, over the last couple of years have been accused of certain things. They came out with a video through the David Ram's channel, basically addressing all of the accusations that that have been levied against them. And I encourage everybody to watch that and have your volunteer activists watch it as well, because people hear rumors and they believe these rumors. And it's important to hear their side of the story as well. That way people can, and I'm not telling people what to think. I'm telling them just listen to their side and then make up your mind and come up, at least you can make a decision based on information from their side as well. So I put the link in the chat if anybody's interested. That's all I had to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juan. Thanks for your activism. Does anybody want to add anything to that, or otherwise we can go on to I think probably our final question or so, which was from Michael, from Mikey, which is how receptive are folks in New Zealand to vegan outreach in general?
Good. Man, when I first started, pre-COVID, I was late to the party. This was about 2 years ago. Apparently, the cubes used to be a lot bigger, especially with attendance from volunteers. And yeah, like the reception would be great, but I feel like when you look at factors like which country and stuff like that, it kind of takes away from factors in which you wouldn't think about, but actually are more important. Like the same with when someone says, oh, in my country, there's a really heavy meat culture, so it must be really hard for people to go vegan, that kind of thing. Like literally every single country is like that, pretty much. And the same with like, oh, how is the reception of the message in this country or that country? I think when we focus on a particular criteria, we change our perception of the event based on that criteria. It's like if I were to tell you, oh, how is your outreach on Wednesdays or Thursdays? Instead of looking at how your personal outreach is going, or if it's raining or if it's sunny, like all of those factors, you'll ignore them just to focus on that specific trait. And I think the most important factor of all would just be to focus on your own outreach, your own conversations. Not how people are receiving you, but how you're carrying out the message. Are you speaking for the animals the way that the animals would like to be spoken for? This is something that I really got caught up in when I first started, and it's something that I still need to work on as well, until I die, really. Yeah. Just focusing on self-improvement rather than the external factors that we can't control. But yeah, to actually answer the question, yeah, in New Zealand, people are, in my experience, people are not really willing to give their pure opinions unless they're obviously a very opinionated person. But yeah, so we have quite a few people who just kind of try to agree with you, really. They'll just try to agree with you, but not actually take on the message, or not actually try to give a definitive opinion. They kind of just want to sit on the fence. They want to be like, oh yeah, I think it's wrong, but I think more people need to change before I do, or something like that. And yeah, I'm sure a lot of places are like that. And a lot of people are like that in general. So yeah, it's just focusing on that principle of, number one, holding those people accountable by telling them the truth, and two, just educating them on what animal rights is, which is the perfect situation in the cube, because that's the first time, the only time ever probably, that you'll be able to talk to someone who has just watched slaughterhouse footage and they're stopped to talk to you about it. Honestly, like just saying that, it's such an amazing opportunity that I take for granted a lot.
Super. Thank you for that perspective. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to wrap up. So I'm just going to ask each of my panelists to give a really brief final few words from each of our panelists that you'd like to leave us with. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Thanks.
Just know that you're a pebble thrown in a pond, and your actions can be ripples in your community, in your family, all of that. I get thanked a lot for being an activist. I do it for the animals. I spend my vacations traveling. I'm grateful that I have a job and a supportive husband that allows me to be able to do those things. And I do it for them. Some say that I'm making up for the 32 years that I consumed animals. But I feel that it's my passion and my drive is to help speak up for them in everything that I do. And if I can just add one extra minute, just because this is pretty impactful, I'm going to share just for a moment, just to show you, to let everybody know that AV is a global organization. And if you can see my screen, that's the shot from their website where you can go and search for the chapters that are currently active. So we even have them in Africa. So it's definitely something to consider. I highly recommend, no matter how you get active, just get active for the animals, because we're the ones that are giving them a voice, because everything else happens, you know, behind closed doors. Thanks.
Louise, final words?
Yes. Okay. Well, first I want to maybe answer more thoroughly a question that I was starting to answer. The one Mikey asked a great question earlier that I don't think we got to cover, is to how to develop, how to increase your attendance for cubes. I think it's a great question. And one of them was with going to eat with activists after cubes is one. But I think one that I was doing with Chris, which is my co-organizer here in Atlanta, was going to sanctuaries and having days at the sanctuary where we not only help, the people that own the sanctuaries, so they have the sanctuaries, which is such an incredible job, and it's a full-time job, and like there's always something to do. So not only do we get to help them and the animals, but we get to build a sense of community with our with the local activists. So or potlucks are also really good for that. They really encourage like community building, or like movie nights where we get to watch, we can learn more about veganism or outreach. Workshops also help with that. So just kind of like doing events that bring people together outside of activism, that can help you with activism, but they can also just be a potluck. You can just have a great time and feel like you're with family. So those kind of things are very helpful for community building. And the other thing I wanted to mention, that I wanted to say, I forgot to say it, was that I think that just the importance that it is to step out of our comfort zone. Even if it's a little bit, it doesn't have to look like what somebody else is doing, that they're like doing a disruption. Like I always get very nervous doing disruptions, but I push myself to do them anyway. But it could look like anything. It could look like going to a visual that could be outside of your comfort zone, could do like street activism. And just remembering that this could be like, like this could be very uncomfortable for maybe an hour or for however long you do it. But like then keeping the animals in mind, that for us it's very uncomfortable, but for them it's life or death. Like it's so trying to think of them while we try to push ourselves a little bit more each time we do activism. And yeah, I just want to thank everybody for everything that you do for the animals, and for being here, wanting to learn more and be better and be a better activist. So thanks.
Perfect. Paola, and then Michael, final brief words.
Yeah, thank you. So I quickly want to say about Mikey's question about increasing attendance. It actually also helps for me, or has helped in the past for my group. I actually have a chapter that's like 1,800 people. Can you imagine if all those people showed up to a cube? Yeah. But we have consistently about 20 or so people that show up. And it's interesting because I think the attendance increases when I share something in the page that shows how effective these conversations are, like a message that I've gotten from someone who became vegan, and I share that conversation with the group and they see the effectiveness of it. Humans are interesting too, because they like to see results and want to know that what they're doing is going to be effective. And so that has to be clear, but it's again goes back to my other comment, is don't let anyone tell you that being out there and doing outreach is not important. It is extremely important. It's part of the equation, and we need people out there, because when you go out there and you tell people, like, is it bad to abuse children? Everyone will say, absolutely, of course. Like, I would never abuse a child, and they're already on board. But you have to actually have conversations with people and convince them that it's not a good thing to hurt an animal, because they're not seeing it, right? So there's multi levels here of the layering of the issues that we're facing when we're talking to people. So that education piece is very, very important. And just like there's people have mentioned, there's different ways to get active, which is a beautiful thing, because I can donate $10 a month to an organization who's working on subsidies, and that will take none of my time. But at the same time, I can be out there and be active. So anyone who's watching, please understand the importance of getting out there and having these conversations. They're non-confrontational. They're a great way to meet other people that are just doing the same thing you are, but it's a great way to actually be effective for the animals and put their message out there. This message, you're bringing the animals to the streets with this footage. They are never seen. They're intentionally hidden. So when you show the footage, you are bringing them to the streets, and that is the most participation they can have in their own freedom, is by showing themselves and what they're going through. And we need to be there. And I want to say, it really is a pet peeve of mine when people say things like the animals are not voiceless. Like, obviously they have an audio voice that comes out of them. But the point is, people understand, just like people who are underrepresented politically, they're considered voiceless because they're not heard. They're not heard. So we as humans have a voice. We speak languages that can communicate with each other, and we are the oppressors of the animals. So we need to be able to reach out to each other and be able to get them, the people who are not vegan yet, to understand what they are participating in. And this is a really great way to do it. You can reach a lot of people, even if you stand in the cube and don't have conversations, because you can do that. You could just stand in the cube and not even watch the footage. You are a huge part, because we can't do cubes without you standing there and making the events happen. So feel free to reach me on any social media platform. I am under Paulo Smith, and I will help you if you want to get active, or you're in New York City, whatever the case is, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Michael, any final words?
Yeah, to anyone watching, just please understand how rare this opportunity is to do outreach. Like I said before, there's no other circumstance where you will get someone who has just watched slaughterhouse footage, who is voluntarily watching slaughterhouse footage and wants to have a conversation with you. And again, building on how we make that impact, I said in a video previously, there's no one thing that will make anyone go vegan. Going vegan is like completing a puzzle, a picture puzzle. Every single piece has obviously a very great impact. And when we do these outreach conversations, it's like giving people a whole bunch of pieces to work with. But just because that person will not go vegan on the spot doesn't mean that your conversation hasn't been effective. You will just know until they have completed that picture puzzle, then they will see the whole scope of what ethical veganism is. And when you type up veganism or just vegan on something like Instagram and look at the hashtags, it is so oversaturated and overpopulated with just things like food or the environment. And we really need to bring the message of the animals to the forefront of veganism, and cubes and any kind of animal rights outreach is the perfect way to do that. So if you're on the fence about being active for the animals, please, let's really push the message across to what veganism should really be about, all about animal rights. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to wrap up the conversation for now, I think, to be continued, with just a couple of announcements for our upcoming workshops. AAM, we host regular workshops. So on Tuesday, January 4th, our workshop on vigils bearing witness as activism. On Thursday, January 13, a workshop entitled Greenwashing Our Food, Sustainable Labels Won't Save the Planet with author Hope Bohanek. And on Thursday, February 10th, Hope returns for a workshop on humane washing our food, cage-free, free-range, humane, what do labels really mean? So Hope Bohanek will be facilitating that as well. She has authored a book called The Ultimate Betrayal. Is There Really Happy Meat? Great book. And we have more workshops to be announced. So stay tuned and go on our page and join our group. Thank you for being here, everybody who has attended. Thank you, Michael, Amanda, Louise, and Paola for your time and wisdom. Thank you, Panima, for working the technical back end. And again, if you're interested in becoming a mentor or mentee or want to get involved, please reach out to any AAM mentor or visit www.animalactivismmentorship.com and follow AAM and Farm on social media. That's it. That's a wrap, folks. Any final comments you can put in the chat? So thank you all very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for sharing your wisdom. It's awesome.